First, let me just say for those of you who don't know, and I assume since he's been here for so long that you do know, but there was no better journalist than Charles Bierbauer and his wife, Suzanne Schaefer, who was one of the first women in the Pentagon to give the brass a lot of trouble. So they're just terrific. So I miss them in Washington, but they're doing God's work down here. So I love being here. I love the city. I love the state. I was thinking it reminded me of my oldest son when he left for college. He went to University of Iowa to play football with Hayden Fry. And so and he grew up in Washington, D.C. And he called me like the first day he was there. He said, "Mom, everybody here is so friendly." And I said, "Well, yeah." And I grew up in the Midwest. I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "No, Mom, they say hello to you on the street." And I said, "Wow." So this was a totally foreign concept to him. But I love this state because they say hello to you on the street. And it's a great place to be, particularly because Washington hasn't been all that much fun lately, I think, as most of you know. I have one quick South Carolina story to tell you. I was down here many years ago, and that whole we were in the Reagan administration together thing is I was really, really young at the time. I just want you to know that part. I was down here for covering the Hodges-Beasley race. And we went to this big armory where they were having a fundraiser, but it was a fundraiser of the sort where it was just a casual fundraiser. I don't think it was a high dollar one, just to, everybody come and they paid $25 or $50 or whatever. Well, typical CNN, we arrived like 5 hours before anything happens, and we're there 5 hours after it's happened. So we were sitting there, and this guy comes up and he goes, "Oh, wow, CNN. Oh, that's so exciting you're here." And I said, "Oh, thanks. It's really good to be here. It's, I love this state." And he said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here." Now, before I tell you this next part, I'm a vegetarian. I have been for many, many years, not for anything other than I just never liked the taste of meat. I'm from a hunting family. Dead things hung in our garage all winter long. So I have lots of hunting credentials, but I'm a vegetarian. And so he comes, he said, "We're so excited you're here, and this is just going to be so great because we just killed 3 deer for tonight." And I said, "Okay, that sounds good." And so I have this producer who is always scoping out meals for me in various places. And so he said, "Well, let me just run up and down the buffet table and say, I'm sure there'll be something you can eat." So he comes back and he says, "Okay." And we already decided, I put everything on my plate because when people are so nice to you, it's hard to go, "But I'm a vegetarian." And then he eats whatever I get. So we have this, it's why we've been together for 25 years now. So he came back and he said, "Okay," he said, "there's bread, there's butter, there's a little bit of salad. But I think there's something you can eat kind of at the end." And he said, "It looks like mashed potatoes and maybe some vegetables in it with some gravy." And he said, "But I think it looks like it's vegetarian." I said, "Okay." So we go down the line because the guy's saying, "Oh, come on over, come on and have some food." So he puts the venison on my plate. And I said, "Oh, thank you so much." And we do this and we get done. And I say, "Now, what is this?" And he said, "Oh, that's mash." And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll have some of that. What is that exactly?" He said, "Oh, it's all the deer parts that aren't over here." Cuisinarted with potatoes. I said, "Okay." So I love South Carolina because the people are really nice, and he never even noticed, but as we're having this conversation, he's going like this, over the bread and all that. So, but I always remembered him because he was just so excited to have a guest, and this just was, to me, such South Carolina hospitality. Speaking of not South Carolina hospitality, I wanted to talk a little bit about political hostility and what's going on in the public discourse at this point, which is painful to cover, and I'm sure for you all is painful to hear most of the time. Gail Collins is a great columnist for the New York Times and a really good writer, wrote a column recently, the subheadline of which was, "Which state is having the most appalling campaign season?" And, okay, you were on the list. But the really good news is you didn't win. Nevada won this year, so congratulations for not making the list. But I thought, she's really right, because when I read it, I just thought, she's right. Like in Arizona, they're fighting about whether there were headless bodies in the desert. And, in New York, in the Senate race, they're discussing, like, who had an affair and whose child was born out of wedlock. And they're talking about witchcraft in Delaware. And you just, after a while, there was this great Seinfeld episode where the crazy guy with all the hair comes screaming in because something's happening. He goes, "I feel like I'm taking crazy pills." And that's kind of what this election feels like to me, because it's just been so nutty. And nutty is one thing, but it's also has had an undertone of some real viciousness in the sense of certainly of the dialogue and the harsh words. And look, I like a good political fight as much as the next person. But it seems to me that so much is being said, when your mother told you, don't say anything that you can't live with. And I think a lot of stuff is being said that gets in the way then of governance when we get past the political season, which I know you're all going to say, well, when is that we get past the political season? But, hopefully we'll have a little respite coming up. There was also I was trying to figure out why things have gotten so kind of hostile, why people are so at each other's throats. And I put it together with another article that I read called Year of the Missing Candidates, which was on Politico. I recommend you go look at it sometime if you can, not just because I'm quoted in it, but because it's a very good article. And it's about how you don't see the candidates anymore. The candidates are not on the campaign trail. A lot of it is about ads. The candidates aren't even telling the press where they're going. They're not putting out schedules. So this is not true of all of them, but this is true in enough places to be troubling. So, when I was talking to this guy, and he said, well, why do you think that is? And I said, well, basically, let's go back, and look at some of the greater moments that we've seen this year. There is first of all, Charlie Rangel, a congressman from Harlem, who's been in some hot water lately about some of his business dealings, who gets chased down the halls of Congress with a guy who's talking to him rather nicely, saying, "Oh, hi, how are you, Congressman? How's it going?" Da da da. And then, Rangel turns around to talk to him, and he just, starts pummeling him with stuff about why did you, cheat the taxpayers? Why did you do this or that or the other thing? And I said, part of it is, if you also think back to Arlen Specter, for instance, when he ran in Pennsylvania, and he went up there for a town hall meeting, and I mean, he just got pummeled, and not like hard, tough questions, but like screaming, sort of pushing at him. And I said, if you are the candidate, there is no way to look good when that's going on. The TV pictures are terrible. You look besieged. You look as though you've done something wrong. You're encircled by people who are screaming at you. And so no matter how calm you are, it just looks bad. And it shows up on YouTube, and it shows up on, across the networks. I mean, we can't resist a good political yelling battle. The only person who can get away with this, by the way, and I'll talk a little more about him later, is Chris Christie, the new governor in New Jersey. Like, he's forever telling voters where to get off, and they love him, So he somehow has that kind of personality that can withstand it. Arlen Specter does not. So there have been so many moments. These guys are scared to go out there because it hurts them, even if they have a perfectly rational explanation. Even if you say, "Whoa, who was that crazy person?" The pictures are really explosive. I think the other thing is anybody with a flip cam, anybody with a telephone, they're so guarded now because people are looking for how many hits they can get on YouTube. Can I get this candidate doing this? Can I get this candidate doing that? And I think it's freaking them out. And they just don't go out. Now, look, they also, campaigns are expensive. They have to raise money. I mean, there's other reasons to be doing it. Candidates that are ahead don't necessarily have to go out and do a lot. They just have to kind of play out the clock. Also, you have people that you have, without naming any names, but if you have a friendly media, all you have to do is go to them. because you're talking to your people, because they're watching that media. And if you're on the right or the left, you've got a place to go, and you're going to reach your base. So why go out and talk to anybody that might give you grief if you can get a friendly interview someplace else? One of the things this article also said is that they're even stiffing. Now, I'm used to getting stiffed in the national media. They don't tend to like, people don't tend to, politicians don't like to be seen on national TV because it makes them look too Washington. And so when you're in the middle of a campaign, you try not to look, you try to pretend you're from wherever you're running. And so they don't want to go on shows like ours. They want to go on like local shows. Only now, they don't even want to do that. And I think that there's multiple reasons why the candidates are missing this year. But one of them, I really think one of their for not giving out schedules and for not going out more and having town hall meetings is the level of discourse has become incredibly uncivil. And in some states worse than others, but it is very hard even to get them to debate. We have tried to get lots of folks together for a debate, and they don't want to do it. You know, they don't know what's coming. And so I think, you know, we have to, in some ways, I look at the internet, and I was telling Suzanne earlier, I said, you know, I'm just never going to forgive Al Gore for inventing the internet, because it has, and the thing is, I'm like a free speech person. You know, I think the more press, the better. But somehow, somewhere along the line in the sort of uncontrolled great world of the internet, which I know I'm supposed to love and have a love-hate relationship with it, is we've, like, all this intimacy has come in. Like, you know what this person said, and you've seen this person doing this, and you can Google them, and 8 billion things come up. And somehow, all that intimacy has made it so we don't know each other. It just is working backwards for some reason. And I think it also adds to the angst that's out there. There was a really good piece, I think in the New York Times, and I think it was today, where they did a focus group. You know, they just sort of get people in and have them talk about stuff and try to get a feel for it. And they said, you know, it's not, yes, people are worried about the economy, but just in general, they don't like the tone of things. You know, people are fed up with just, you know, just everything feels awful. It's not just that it's a bad economy. It's that nothing seems to get done, and people are saying bad things about each other. You know, somebody brought up how the kids, you know, had a food fight in the cafeteria, and that people are hostile on the roads. Although I have to say here, oh my goodness, this is great traffic here. You all should be grateful. I couldn't believe it. People actually like slow down when the light's orange, you know, and it's kind of amazing. They don't do, in Washington, they run red lights. I mean, it's pretty awesome. So, you know, I think reality TV has met politics, and I don't think it's for the better. And I don't know how you put the genie back in the bottle. I don't think you can. And I don't want to argue against more is worse, because I don't think more is worse. It's just somehow we need to find a way to harness the internet so that people know where to go, who's reliable, you know, who's telling the truth. But as you know, people have different versions of the truth. I know that sounds crazy, but they do. And so it's just hard to figure out how we can put the genie back in the bottle, at least to the extent where politicians feel free to move about their states, and where they're not afraid of the media, and they're not afraid of, you know, one of these trackers, which are people from the other campaign that follow their every move, waiting for them to do something, and both sides do it, waiting for them to do something bad. I had a sort of an aha moment, if I could quote Oprah, and I've never done that before, when Lee Hamilton was a congressman from Indiana, a very esteemed guy, very Indiana, just, you know, right down the middle, and a good guy, and he retired. And we had the Clinton impeachment ongoing, and we decided we wanted to do a piece on political hypocrisy, because you know, no matter who's in charge, the person in charge is always for special prosecutors, and the party not in charge is always against them, and then they flip, and then they, you know, so we wanted to do something. So I went out to Lee Hamilton's house, and I sat down with him, and I said, we're talking about political hypocrisy, and I have never in my life ambushed somebody in an interview, not once. And so we're sitting there having this conversation about hypocrisy, and I said, but, you know, I mean, do you think it's just a part of the culture? I mean, just, you know, that politics involves some form of hypocrisy? And he looked at me, and in that moment, I saw he was like scared. And I thought, what is this? And he looked at me and he said, well, I suppose you could go back and find any kind of soundbite that's going to make me look like a hypocrite. And I thought, wow, he thinks I'm here to get him, you know. And I thought, well, I did think, is there a soundbite? But I didn't go there. But you know, and I realized, and this was, you know, Clinton impeachment. So I realized at that point that the relationship between reporters and people they cover is a very tricky one. And I want to ask hard questions of somebody, but I don't want to like trap them. That shouldn't be our goal. Now I think our politicians, I mean, this is like Lee Hamilton on steroids. I just feel like that politicians feel trapped by us, which is, you know, by the royal us. Whether it's the flip cam or whether it's the big old cameras, that they don't really know how to handle this new age. One of the things, I also think there's just way too much incoming at the internet, and I can't stand it that people don't have to sign their names to things. When I was about 20, I wrote a letter to the editor of the Washington Post. The Washington Post called me. They verified my name, they verified my address, and they verified my phone number and said, would you mind if we printed your letter? Now, I can assure you, I mean, I know, again, you know, there's no way to put this back in the bottle, but there has to be people need to be responsible for their words. And if you cannot, you know, I mean, people cannot, it's why I don't like anonymous sources. AP, Suzanne will tell you, always had this rule that you couldn't use an anonymous source to speak ill of somebody else. That person had to be on the record. If the anonymous source was going to say we're about to go to war, well, that's one thing. If he's going to say that guy's a jerk, you can't use it. You know, put your name to it if you're going to hit somebody. And I know there are websites who do agree to that. The problem is that you can, of course, make up a name. I mean, it's the internet, so you can make up a name and you can make up a fake, fake place for people to, to send your verification to. So I do think that there is something that needs to be done, or at least what has added to this uncivil discourse has been this kind of wild frontier that we have about the internet. Having said that, I truly believe that there is now more information out there to be had. People can be better informed now than ever before because it is amazing what you can get access to. So it's why I have the love-hate relationship, because I mean, I'm on it every day because I've learned some new way to find something, and you can immediately find out somebody's FEC records and who this guy was and who did he lend money to. And so it's like this huge gift that somehow we need to keep sort of focusing on that part of it and try to figure out the rest of it, because I do think it's adding an awful lot to what's become a pretty bad debate, especially when I was talking to my producer today. He said, look, every Tom, Dick, and Mary has a cell phone that can take pictures, and that's the whole problem. I said, okay, well, I'll tell them that. So that's from my producer, who does think sort of along the same lines. And in the end, what it's doing is keeping us from talking to the candidates. In the end, we have less information about the candidates on a personal basis because we have so much information and misinformation in other places. I think one of the things that also sort of adds to this, and I'm going to do a mea culpa, and I'm not going to do this because there's going to be questions afterwards, and I'm sure some of them will be about the media, so there's only so much falling on my sword I'll do, and we'll let you go ahead and hammer. But I think one of the problems that is our fault is that we caricature everyone. Everyone is a flat caricature on here's this talking head, he's going to say this bombastic thing, and here's a guy from this side, and he's going to say this. And when I first took over, I have a show on Sunday mornings, and I first took it over, I said, we've got to find a way to like give these people flesh, you know, to say, here's what this person is about. You know, here's a little something about this guy, because I think people turn on Sunday shows and go, isn't that the same guy that was on there like last week? And didn't we say those exact same things? And you would be right if that's what you think. So we came up with this idea called Getting to Know. And we take one person every show on Sunday. And in the commercials, we ask completely random questions to them that have nothing to do with politics, just to sort of see what they're going to say. I'm going to play you one of these and then try to tell you what my point is. This, I believe you'll recognize this guy.
State of the Union with Candy Crowley, CNN Sunday morning, 9 Eastern.
Of all the things there are to eat that you consider South Carolina delicacies, what's your favorite?
Ham biscuits.
Ham biscuits. Okay, I'll go with that. Senate's about to recess. I know you'll be spending some time with your constituents, but what's the fun thing you're going to do?
I'm gonna do my reserve duty in Afghanistan. No, the fun thing I'm doing is go play some golf down the hill.
Which you do a lot, you know.
Yes.
When you get a break from things. What, are you a night person or are you a day person?
I'm from 10 to 2 person.
And what was the best thing about being a general?
Wearing the uniform, practicing law, serving your country, and being able to practice your profession in uniform.
And finally, I would walk into your living room, what would I see?
Much crap on the floor.
Okay, so my point here is, my focus group, which is basically my family after this show, this only appears on the web. And my daughter-in-law called me and she said, you should do that, like, you should put that in your show, because now I kind of want to hear what he has to say. And now, I think Lindsey Graham, I don't think if we put it on the show, Lindsey Graham would say a bunch of crap on the floor. But, you know, my point is, I think that we don't do enough of this. I think that there is not enough time to get these people outside their little caricatures, and so that you can say, oh, that's what this guy is about, and here's a little bit about him, and it just makes them more interesting, and it makes them more human. Because I can tell you in complete honesty that I have met a handful of politicians that I thought were jerks, and the rest of them I thought were trying to do a good job. I really did. And I was up on Capitol Hill with these people. So I spent a lot of time with them, and I don't think I really believe that most of them are trying to do a good job, and somehow they come across like jerks, and I think that's kind of on us in some ways, and we need to do a better job of rounding them out and not having them be, oh, here's this right-wing person, here's this left-wing person, and here's, you know, here they all are arguing. I also wanted to point out that there is some fault with viewers. There was a Pew poll out last week, which I saved for you, which found that nearly half of all Americans admire politicians who refuse to compromise. So if you admire politicians who refuse to compromise, you have set up automatically a head-to-head argument between people. And that includes 53% of independents, by the way, people who swing back and forth. So 53% of independents admire people who don't compromise. So I think there's also something, you know, the stories that came out of this, and I don't disagree, were that basically the cable news chatter that, you know, President Obama complains about all the time and everybody complains about is exactly what people are looking for. So, you know, and if people wanted something else, I think they'd probably be tuning into PBS News. But PBS doesn't get good ratings. You know why? Because people think it's more interesting someplace else. So there's a viewer problem, there's a presenter problem, you know, and there's sort of a tonal problem. polarization in D.C., and there's just one thing about the congressman. I did a story not too long ago about Patrick Leahy of Vermont, liberal from Vermont, and Dick Lugar, who is a conservative from Indiana. They are best friends, and they have been best friends since they both showed up together on the Agriculture Committee as freshmen. And Leahy tells this hysterical story about how, the chairman is always sitting at the table, and then they go in descending rank, they go down, so Lugar's here and Leahy's here, because here's the Democratic side and here's the Republican side. They sort of bonded in their lack of seniority and lack of knowing how to get around Capitol Hill. They became great friends. They worked on a lot of agriculture things together. Leahy, to get Lugar on board about something, took him up to Vermont to show him Vermont agriculture. Then Leahy went to Indiana to see Lugar agriculture, and they have over the years, and they were decrying the whole idea of how bad things are. And they said, Lugar's daughter Leahy's daughter and Lugar's son and their spouses live back to back in the same neighborhood in Arlington, and so they both go to the houses at the same time and take the grandchildren to the playground together, and they call it the bipartisan playground. and so much of that is leaving D.C. And they think, and I thought this was a really good point, they think that part of it is because people have to raise so much money, they're always back home on the weekends. They're not living in Washington anymore. One, because they don't want the Washington stink, so they keep their homes back in their districts instead of, bringing the wife and the children. It's also very expensive in Washington, and, they can't all do that. And they have to raise all this money, so you don't have the, hey, let's go get a quick glass of wine and discuss this or that. You don't have the softball games. You don't have any of that. And so it just makes people unable, they can't relate to each other in any way, shape, or form in this same way that we can't relate to these politicians. If you don't play soccer, if you're not standing on the sidelines when your kids are playing soccer, you can't relate to one another. And I think I think they had a point about that. I think that's completely true. I wanted to quickly turn to the elections. What I think is going to happen, I don't know. And sort of where we are, sort of status, because I want to hear your questions, and I want to save time for that. So let me sort of quickly say a couple things. First of all, President Obama remains personally popular. His approval ratings are, like low 40s, but he remains personally popular, which would be great if November was the People's Choice Award, but it's the midterms, so it's not going to be all that helpful. What we see, there was a great, I think it was maybe Peter Hart, pollster, who said that 1 in 4, 25% of people in the United States are either unemployed or have a family or know someone who is unemployed, and that's all you need to know about this election. That's what people can't get past. And the people that are the other 75%, many of them are worried about losing their jobs. That's what's driving this election. It's not anger, it's fear in some cases. Yes, there's a little bit of impatience, but it's the economy. And Speaker Pelosi said the other day, if the Republicans, I wish I could, let's see, if the Republicans can't make anything out of a 9.6 unemployment rate, they ought to disband the party. And I think she's probably right. I think it does not, I think like everyone else thinks, it doesn't look good for the Democrats. The question is this a big tsunami election, or is this just really bad? And there's a difference. We'll see. I guess I would go with everybody else at this point. Conventional wisdom is that the Republicans will take the House, but not the Senate. It's as good a guess as anybody's, but I saw somebody sent me an email today of an article somebody wrote talking about the October surprise and how Democrats were going to close the gap. It's a pretty big gap for them to close, but so you'll hear lots. Obviously, the Democrats are coming home. We are seeing some closing in polls here, I think, as well as elsewhere. But again, it's a big long gap that they have to close. I'm not sure they can do it. One of the reasons that I think this is really interesting is that Democrats in general have about a 10% advantage in the female vote, it's down to 3%. And I think that's a home and hearth issue. I think that's women, you know, going, whoa, you know, I've got kids to feed, I've got, you know, kids to send to college, you know, whatever it is. So that's huge, and it's one of the reasons, since women make up more than 50% of the vote, that Democrats' big advantage has always been women. The other thing that's worrisome to the Democrats at this point is, and the reason you see the president out in Madison, Wisconsin at the universities, he was out talking last night to a women's group, Fortune 500 women's group, is that they need to get out African Americans and young people. That's who they really energized in 2008. But again, when you look at the polling, African Americans and young people are the least likely to be interested in this election. So you're going to see the president out a lot in African American communities as well as in youth communities, because he's trying to, you know, bring back the juice. The problem is that they really came to vote for Obama, and that's, you know, and Obama is not, you know, these other candidates. And we know he doesn't have any coattails because he lost New Jersey and Virginia last year in an off-year election. So it's problematic for I mean, listen, I'm always in favor of the best story, and right now the best story would be if the Democrats win because no one's expecting it. So I like the unexpected best story, but I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it's, at this point, the electorate's pretty frozen. Let me talk to you really briefly about 2012, and then I want to take your questions. First of all, thing one, the polls don't mean a thing as far as President Obama is concerned at this point. It doesn't matter that his approval rating is at 42%, because Bill Clinton's approval rating was at about the same level as was Ronald Reagan's, and they both won re-election. So this has nothing, this election, although it will be seen as pushback of some of the things President Obama has done, it doesn't have anything to do with 2012. The other thing is, you can ignore all this talk about how Joe Biden's going to the State Department and Hillary Clinton's going to go be vice president. I don't think so. I mean, this is a woman who, like a year ago, was talking about, you know, well, she'd like to retire sometime. So I'm not sure where that came. Probably comes from us, because again, we're biased in favor of a really good story, and that would be great. But I don't see it happening. The other people to watch are the Tea Party and your guy in the U.S. Senate. I mean, if I were going to do most interesting people in this election, it would be Jim. Oh, sorry. Well, your state person, your senator. He's your senator, because Jim DeMint has been very powerful. He has helped elect a number of Tea Party candidates, and while he has said all along that he would support Mitch McConnell, the current Republican leader, for majority or minority leader, whatever happens, you cannot help but know that Jim DeMint has gathered, if some of these people get elected, I mean, he's either going to look good or he's going to look bad, one of the two. If he helps people get elected, they are beholden to him. I asked John Cornyn, who's the senator from Texas who runs the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, I said, well, it kind of looks like there might be a DeMint wing of the Republican Party. He didn't answer the question, which I know surprises you. But in general, the Tea Party, I can't wait to read the morning after. The morning after is either going to be the Tea Party momentum was real. They're going to, you know, if they beat Harry Reid in Nevada, if Rand Paul wins in Kentucky, you've got in Colorado, if the Republican wins in Colorado, that's going to be major, and Jim DeMint is a huge force in that, and has been a huge force. So you will have a headliner, as you know. One time, I was with Bob Dole and his campaign, and he used to get up all the time. And Bob Dole was a funny guy. No one knows this, but he was a very funny guy, and although it was sort of that Kansas prairie wit, so people didn't totally get it. But he would get up. With every speech he would start and say, well, I've learned from the 3B, what do you call it? The 3B rule of speech making. Be straightforward, be brief, be seated. So I won't be seated because I'd love to hear your questions and take any questions I can, but I thank you very much. One thing that you never hear in Washington, D.C., I'm going to say it right now, thank you for listening. Do they need to, oh, yes, I'm assuming that these microphones are so we could hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Cathy Clark. I'm a doctoral student here at the University in Public Health. And I love you dearly. I've been listening to you for years. I think you're one of the best political pundits or people out there. And
I'm coming back here.
And I really think you're wonderful. The only question, and I think some of the frustration you see in the people, the down-home people, the people such as myself, you talk about strategy, and you talk about who's going to win who, and the tea baggers and the Tea Party. But I really think in today's media, we hear all about the strategy. What we don't hear about are the specifics, such as being in public health. I'm very concerned about the healthcare reform bill and things like that. And in CNN and much of the media, you never hear the exact specifics. And you hear about the strategies of where the healthcare bill is going to go and all of that. Why is it that in today's media, we're more about strategy than deploying the factual substance of what really makes a candidate on where they stand on the issues? And why don't we get more of that?
Well, let me say a couple things. The first is that I wish that every news network could be a loss leader and didn't have to worry about profits. Because if that were so, I think you would see a lot more of that, because people don't tend to listen to the kind of substantive thing you're talking about. Having said that, this is where I love the internet, because anything you want to know. Now, I grant you have to go looking for it. Mm-hmm. Is there. Positions of the candidates. I mean, for instance, and I haven't been on it, but I mean, CNN has a political website where you can just pull up anybody's position on anything that's in a race. And I know, and it's not just CNN, it's the Washington Post, and I mean, you can find them anywhere. So there is that you do have, a place to go. But I grant you that it's not done enough. I think it is, and back on us, strategy is easy to talk about, and so I think that's, and we're fast. Look, I'm like a political correspondent, so I do love the horse race, and I do love, like the funky things that happen and all of that, but I take your point that there isn't enough of the substance on TV. But I think in this brave new world, a lot of, when it's so much about niche reporting, that, there are one has to go to a number of different news organizations to get kind of the fuller picture. Also, we're doing specials on substance and stuff.
Because,
put in a plug
because now more than ever, and I just like to make this final point, I think now more than ever you've made a very good point about the people who are voting are very far removed from the candidate. So now more than ever, the onus is on the media, and the onus is on the journalistic reporting and the integrity of it. And so I think the American people are really looking for that, rather than who's going to win where, what's,
Right.
I don't know. But that's...
I hear you. I don't think you're wrong. Let me take one on this side. I'll go back.
Hello, I am a progressive Democrat, and I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming. And I really have followed your entire career and admire you. And I love that you are connected to South Carolina and find the politics so interesting here. So with that said, I'm pleading with you and also challenging you to cover Tom Clemens from the Green Party, who's running against Alvin Green and Senator DeMint. On the ballot, you will see Tom Clemens, Green Party at the top, Alvin Green, and then Senator DeMint. So with that said, please give Tom some coverage. There's never been a better opportunity for the Green Party to get their foot in, and let's just say the Democratic Party is not exactly, by no means, behind Alvin Green. So would you consider covering a Green Party candidate is the question.
You know, we hear this in just in general. I mean, because, you know, first of all, when CNN covers it, it's not like we're there and in the district, because we're sort of like the, you know, 50,000-foot view. But yes, we hear this all the time, and I do think, again, I hate to keep plugging the web, but I do think you would go on and see his views as well as those of DeMint and Green. And yeah, it's always a problem when we go to cover something, because we have some states where there's 5 or 6 different parties running, and we always hear from them, and we always listen, and I hear you. And I will take it back, and they heard you, so.
I understand, but Senator DeMint is more than just these states.
Right.
You know, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Edna Basinski, and I would like for you to speak to 2 comments, and one of them, and these are the things that I certainly hold true. I think that the Supreme Court's ruling that is allowing corporations to buy our vote is really something horrible right now. There's 6-to-1 of those dollars going to the Republican Party. And then secondly, I think it's time that we know that the Tea Party is really the far right arm of the far right, the Republican Party. Would you speak to that, please?
Well, I think that while there are people in the Tea Party who have not previously aligned themselves with every party, that it basically, I mean, they're running on the Republican ticket, and so I think it's fairly obvious that that within the Republican Party there's the Tea Party. As far as the money is concerned, you know, amen, because there's just and it's hard to track. It's hard to figure out who's put up what commercial and who's paid it. There's too much money in politics. Everybody knows that. I mean, not just because there's the perception that people are getting bought, because they have to spend so much time raising it. So, you know, they're not like governing, for heaven's sakes, because they're like have to run over and get on the phone and ask someone for money. So it's nutty. And the Supreme Court ruling, I'm assuming, will eventually Congress will fix. At least there's some movement toward there. I don't know, because it's Congress. But they certainly have attempted to. Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Judith Trunkas, and I'm with the International Relations Program. I'm a PhD student here. But I'm also writing for a local paper, and I interview many local politicians. And what I see increasingly is that pretty much the more seasoned the politician is, the more likely they will ignore my question or not answer it. And then usually what I do is then I push back with a follow-up question. And then this is where I don't really know what to do next, because if I push again, they will get angry and not answer the rest of my questions. So what do you think is the best way to do it?
I'm with you on this, okay? It's really hard. In fact, I was talking about this with someone, is that I give everybody sort of 3 strikes, and then I say, so I take it you're not going to answer my question. Because after a while, if you've got a limited amount of time, all you need to do is point it out and move on. Because there comes a point of diminishing returns in an interview, and especially if you're doing a live interview. I mean, I'm just learning how to do this whole thing on TV live, and it drives me crazy because, I mean, I did this go-round with Secretary of State Clinton one time, and I mean, and it was about Hamid Karzai. She was my first interview in February. And I said, so do you trust Hamid Karzai? Hamid Karzai is the elected leader. Yes, I know he's the elected leader of history. Do you trust Hamid Karzai? And so we have an ally that we're working with him because he's the elected leader of it. And so we went, you know, I did it 3 times, and I said, so we're just going to leave this one on the table? And she sort of, you know, you got to move on. And don't be afraid about making them mad. Who cares? I mean, you know, I mean, I get it. I mean, and part of the problem, I think, is, because I judge you're probably pretty nice, is I don't like being mean to them either. You know, I like nice people, and I'm a good Midwestern girl, and I try to be polite in my question, but after a while they tick me off. And so you have to, you know, but there's a way to be aggressive without being rude. You can push and keep pushing. And don't worry, if they get mad at you, they get mad at you. You know? That's how it goes.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for coming. I have a two-part question on polling. First off, are some of the pollsters getting too identified with one side or the other where you really can't trust them in a general election? And two, with the advent of cell phones, are we going to get to the point where you can't really trust the polls that are made on home phone dialing, where you really don't know who they're talking to and if those are going to be voters?
You're a little above my pay scale here on the polls, but I will tell you on the last question. I know they're polling cell phones now, but I don't know how they. Honestly, I don't know how they do any of that. I'm the person down there fighting for you, going, well, why did they say this? How many people did you talk to? No one ever calls me. I'm like that person. As far as the bias in the polls and can you trust them, there are definitely Democratic pollsters and definitely Republican pollsters who need to be identified as such, but they have reputations. So, you know, do you trust them completely? I trust them to ask the questions that will most favor their candidates, and I trust them to give the right results, because otherwise they'd be out of, I mean, if you don't trust a poll, you don't use the poll, so I trust them.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Kenneth Spry. I'm a graduate of Benedict College. I had some concerns about will the black farmers ever get paid? And second, do the media incite the rage of the people against President Obama? Seems like it's kind of biased, that it's more on the negative side instead of stating the positive things that he's done, or is that the Democrats' responsibility to, you know, put forth to the media the positive things that President Obama has done?
To your first one, I know that this black farmers bill has been, you know, run around Congress forever. I do know they're closer, you know, than ever, and that they have, the Senate passed it, right?
Yes.
So I'm not sure where it is it hasn't been something I've followed that closely, but yeah, I think it's en route. I mean, I can't give you a date certain or all that. As far as the media and the president, first of all, it's kind of the dog bites man thing in some ways, and that is that if the president's going down in the polls, or if the president says something unusual that gets him in trouble, that's going to make more news than him saying the same old thing that that the economy is getting better slowly. And do we have a responsibility to say, I think the question comes when you talk about good. What about the good things he's done? If I get on the air and I say, well, here's a really good thing President Obama's done. He passed health care. I can't say that, because that's not, you know, that's a total judgment call. I can tell you that more than half the country thinks it wasn't a good thing. So it is up to the Democrats to push back. And part of the storyline of this particular election cycle has been that the Democrats haven't backed him up. They aren't out there selling health care. They aren't out there selling even Wall Street reform, for heaven's sakes, which like the whole country loves. You know, they aren't out there selling the stimulus package. They're out there doing ads sort of against the Republican candidates. So yes, but I take your point that the media is pretty negative. Against President Obama or against George Bush or against who's ever in office, because it's the nature of the media to, and because everybody thought we gave great coverage to him, that we were like, we're in love with him, and that's why he got elected, and then we gave him so much great press, you know, in his honeymoon period, and now we're giving him bad press. So it's, you know, it's just, I think it comes and goes with the ebbs and flow of the candidate.
Thank you for coming to South Carolina.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Andy Bell. I'm a student here. Wanted to thank you for coming. And you touched on this briefly. You talked about the partisan news networks and how certain politicians will speak only through those networks to get to their base. Is this something that you think is going to become a trend or even the norm? And if so, how would CNN respond to that in covering these candidates?
I don't think it's a trend. I don't think it'll become the norm. I think it has become the norm. I don't know how this gets undone. CNN's response to it has been, we're You know, we are trying to give you all the information. We are trying to play it straight. Now, there are places where you can get commentary on CNN, so don't get me wrong. But, you know, reporters in the field, anchors, you know, CNN's cachet has always been, here it is. Now, there are a lot of people that don't agree with that, but that's certainly what we aspire to and have always aspired to. Unfortunately, it's not always the greatest ratings getter. But that's CNN's brand, and we're not going to change that. So we're in it for better or for worse.
Thank you.
On that same subject, notice that the people who really stir things up are from the right-wing radio, extreme right, dominates the news. Same way for the cable channels, except for CNN. No liberal has ever really made it big on talk radio or the channel. Overman and Maddow do a pretty good job. CNBC. Any observations on that? Why is that?
Well, certainly talk radio has driven a lot of the conversation. Oh, I'm sorry. The question is that talk radio, in his words, if I could, extreme right-wing talk radio has driven the conversation, and that no liberals have been successful in the talk radio, and that you've got Maddow and you've got Oberman, but then, you know, they seem to be the only ones out there, and my observations about that. In general, conservatives have been better at the talk radio thing, at least in terms of listeners. There was a liberal, I can't remember now what it was called.
Air America.
Yeah, Air America, and you know, and all I can tell you is it fizzled because people don't listen. So I don't know whether, you know, the conservatives or however you want to describe them are more entertaining, or, you know, liberals don't listen to radio. I don't know. But liberals are generally better on the internet. And the internet is where you see the blogosphere. The liberals are much stronger there than the conservatives tend to be. We're going to get these guys that are standing. Yeah.
Welcome to South Carolina. My name
Thank
is
you.
Douglas Wilson. I'm actually an alumni of USC. And I love watching your show. I wish it can stay on past 10 a.m. I know you have Fareed at 10 and Reliable at 11.
We got to
You
get
come
those
back
guys out of there.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you, going back to the point where you said in regards to politicians not being able to talk to each other, and a lot has to do, and you brought up a good point, maybe it's us. Politicians are not working together, and I really am very jealous of my parents' generation, because it seems like back then they had the Kennedys and Lyndon Johnson, and those guys worked together and they passed a lot of great things, and there's so many problems now. And I was privileged to be on the campaign trail. I used to work for Obama here in South Carolina, and I saw a lot of problems that are taking place, and I just wanted to know from you is, what can we do to make our politicians work together? I get tired of MSNBC, I get tired of Fox News. It's like everybody just keeps arguing, but nobody's getting anything done. And people like myself that are not working, we're just suffering back here. So,
Right.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, you speak for a lot of people. Vote.
Yeah, I'm definitely
Okay,
gonna vote.
you know, whoever your guy is, and then, you know, you hold their feet to the fire. I mean, what happens is, you know, everyone votes and this person goes off to Washington, and the next time you see him, it's 2 years later, or 6 years later, or whatever it happens to be. You would be surprised how much attention congressional offices pay to their mail, okay, and or the email, or their fax, or their phones, you know, and that's what you know, to me, you just got to, you know, if enough people go like, no, not this guy. Will you compromise? Will you work with these people? You just got to keep at it. Because honestly, I think there are a lot of people up on Capitol Hill that are tired of it too.
Yeah.
Fight the good fight.
Yeah.
Hi, I guess I have kind of the reverse of that question. You said earlier that you feel that politicians feel trapped by us, but I feel like the reverse of that statement could be true as well, that a lot of Americans feel trapped in the political system. And I guess I wonder, what do you think that politicians should be doing to kind of civilize the discourse and, like, I don't know, just lessen the polarization?
Yeah, I think they should, you know, actually talk to one another and sit down at a table together. I think part of what's happened is whatever party is in power, they draw up a bill, they put it on the floor and go, here you go. You know, why not like talk to people before you put the bill on the floor? You know, why not put together a bill that you can, you know, possibly all agree on, or 80% of you, or whatever it happens to be. The problem is that this discourse that people are talking about moves people further to the right or further to the left, depending on which they are. And so, like, if they're going to lose their jobs because they're being too compromising, then they don't do it. But I think, you know, they need to stop talking at each other. I hate to sound like my mother, and start talking to each other. It's just like basic civility stuff, you know. Find out what the other guy's about and figure a way around it.
Thanks.
Uh-oh, you hopped up here.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
Oh, so we got, no, Charles is, tell me. We've got 3 people standing here. Okay. Casey Allen.
Sorry, I have a journalism question for you. The internet isn't obviously the first technological advance that's come along and changed journalism. It seems like in the past, journalism has survived and thrived. What makes the internet different, and do you think that it's a case where journalists and viewers just haven't quite caught up to it yet, or is the internet something that's going to continue to kind of harm some aspects of journalism as a craft moving forward?
I don't actually think it harms journalism as a craft. I think at the moment newspapers are struggling. I think this is a huge transition going on, but I think journalism survives, good and bad. And I think it's another place to put your journalism. I'm, you know, happy to put a story, you know, on the web, on our website, and have it go out. My problem with the web is just the vitriol that goes through it. Not saying, listen, I think there's wonderful things about that. I was kidding about Al Gore. I like the web, but I think that it is a tool to harness. And we haven't quite harnessed it yet. But I think it's great for journalism, frankly. I really do. I think competition is good, and I just think the depth into which you could just write forever on the internet, which some people do.
Thank you.
Hi. This is a tiny bit off the political topic, but I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk about the challenges you've faced as a woman in politics, in the television industry. And I don't know how to quite put this, but I'm nearing 50, and you are such a great model for me as a not 25, you know, as not a Barbie. And so I appreciate you in so many ways.
Thank you. It's
I
what
really
people
love your
call
work.
women of a certain age.
Yeah, okay, that would be it.
When I started in the late 70s, I had a radio station manager who told me that I could never actually be on the air because no one would ever accept a woman's voice as the voice of authority. So we've come a fair amount of ways. I mean, my definition of equality, or one of my definitions of equality, is, I used to tell people this all the time, if I can let my hair go as gray as Wolf Blitzer's and stay on the air, then we've got equality. So I'll let you know. Oh, good. See, now he's standing up, so he's serious.
All right. Well, I'm sorry I hopped up late, but I had a question. And I'll be brief, I swear. What is your thoughts on the idea of imposing term limits on congressmen and women in order to maybe enforce that they focus less on their campaign and just getting reelected and more on the actual issues?
I feel like if the great state of South Carolina wants to send Senator X, you know, to Washington for the next 50 years, they ought to be allowed to do that. That this is sort of, you know, stop me before I vote again thing just doesn't, I don't get it, you know? Because if we want somebody out of office, then you go work to get somebody out of office, you know? Term limits just sounds like undemocratic to me, and I don't know why. I've always felt that from the very beginning. I just think, well, don't vote for the guy, you know? Now, some people are going to vote for him and he may win, but hey, that's democracy, you know? Eventually, you know, either they die or you vote them out of office. One of those two things will happen, and you're going to survive quite a few of them here in South Carolina. But so I just, it doesn't seem to me, I mean, I get your point about how then they wouldn't be campaigning. Maybe the term should be longer than 2 years. I mean, the House is just ungodly, but it's every 2 years. So it's just you're in a constant loop of elections. But I just think term limits just don't sound democratic to me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to our state.
Of course.
I'm from Iran originally, but I'm a U.S. citizen. Been here for almost about 35 years now. I love this country. But what I see a lot of disunity here, racial disunity, political disunity, media disunity, have and have not disunity. I mean, this is almost divided states of America. My question is, what is the role of media to unite the Americans? And politicians are at each other's throat. Peoples are. Everybody is just at each other's throat. I want to hear a voice of unifying voice that unifies the Republicans and Democrats, blacks and white, that would stand above all of these paradigms you see. I want to hear your thoughts. What can your media do to be the voice of unity to make this country united the States of America?
I sort of have two answers to that. The first is that the news media reports on what's going on. And if division is going on, we report that. Having said that, to feed off that for ratings purposes is despicable, okay? That's not, forget uniting the country, that's not journalism. Journalism is not about feeding something because it pumps up your ratings. So, what can we do? I mean, I think, as the lady asked before about substance, I think we, continue to fight the good fight. And be out there with here's what this person says, here's what that person says. I almost one of the main, other than getting to knows, one of the things that I'm trying to do in my show and others doing, this is not some big deal, is I want people sitting at a table looking at each other. I want to bring this guy and they disagree, and I don't want them to fight. I want them to talk to each other. And I think, the more kind of format we can do in that, the better off. Well, first of all, it's a better conversation because I could play both their parts if they're going to yell. So I think that sort of thing. And I think it's an individual obligation. And there are other shows I know that do this, so this is not, unique. But it has a long way to go because I do think that the yelling and the screaming and the bashing, coming from the host, by the way, not from the two people they're with, is not my idea of journalism.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate your appreciation for Candy. I want to ask you one last question, if I might. President Bush, 41, the elder used to say it's the last question that gets you in trouble, but that's not the point. There's a term that I thought would come up this evening that hasn't, and it's Mama Grizzly. And I'd kind of like to get your take as to whether this is something that the media are perpetuating or whether the Mama Grizzly phenomenon, and apparently we have one somewhere in the state, is a genuine thing.
I actually think it is. I mean, let's take Sarah Palin out of the mix here. And let's say that this does not appear to be the year of the woman. In fact, women are going to lose some seats in Congress, primarily because most of the women are Democrats, and it's going to be a bad year for Democrats. Having said that, the whole idea of Mama Grizzly, once again, take out the Sarah Palin and think about it a second. These are women who are fighting for their families. Okay, that's what that is meant to say. Now, we've called them soccer moms, and we've called them all sorts of other things, but that has taken hold. you know, it does speak to people. And particularly with, again, the women's vote being over 50% of the electorate. Women in tough economic times, the ones hardest hit tend to be single women with children. But it does tend to be, there's more women in the workforce now. They're usually the first to be laid off. So this whole idea of a mama grizzly protecting her own has a ring of truth to it. And I think that's why it's, and now it's been associated with Sarah Palin, so everybody goes, oh, God, it's too stupid, and it's all, you know, these crazy women. But it hits on something that's very core about what's going on out there and the kind of that protective feel that most mothers I see in the audience nodding. So I think it's a real phenomenon. I think right now it's a phenomenon for it'll be the year of the conservative Republican woman, if Republicans get their way, because there are a number of new conservatives. They're younger. They tend to have young children, as opposed to most female politicians raised their children and then ran for office. Now we've got more and more women who are like, I think there's more women pregnant in the House, well, in the House of Representatives, not the House, than ever before. So you're seeing young women, and I think Sarah Palin has captured that kind of phenomenon, and I think it's real. I do.
Candy, thank you so much. Let me just close by thanking all of you for being here with us this evening, and the Buchheit family for making this possible. We'll do this again next year, of course. And this has been part of a series of events this week that our college has been sponsoring. We call it i-comm Week. That's I as in information and comm as in communications, the two schools that make up our college. I would like to point out, if I may, because we've got a couple more events the rest of the week. Tomorrow at noon in the Hollings Library, the Baldwin Lecture on Entrepreneurial Journalism and Business Literacy. And Michelle Leder, the editor and founder of Footnoted, that's online, will be our lecturer for that. And on Friday afternoon, that's at 2 o'clock in the Hollings, or noon tomorrow in the Hollings Library. At 2 o'clock on Friday, the Library School, the School of Library and Information Science, is sponsoring one of a series of lectures by Dr. David Carr called Communities of Aspiration. And I invite you to attend those as well. And there are more events, most of them public, and you can look them up on the web, of course. Thank you for being with us here this evening.